Well, welcome into Bayou Roar. On this episode, we'll be recapping LSU's loss to the Ole Miss Rebels and talking about some of my other reactions to Week 5 of college football. But of course, we start with the unfortunate loss that LSU suffered on Saturday at Ole Miss. Now, I am sorry that this came out a little bit later than normal, but I needed some time to take everything in because this was the first game this season that I've not been able to watch live. I was driving back home from vacation, caught pretty much the entire game on the radio broadcast, and I actually wanted to watch it and take in some of, various different people's reactions to the loss so I could come up with my own thoughts on how everything happened in Oxford this past weekend. And look, there's no sugarcoating it at all. This is a loss that absolutely sucks. I mean, there is no excuse for you going into Ole Miss this past weekend and losing that game. LSU is the much better team. They have a much better roster, and by all means, they should have come out of Saturday as the winner. Much like last year when Ole Miss went to Baton Rouge and was the much better team, and yet LSU ended up walking away with the win that night. Now, with that all being said, there's obviously, I think, one big culprit into why obviously you lost on Saturday, and that being the offense. And we'll certainly talk about that in just a second. But, here's the thing that I think we all need to take a deep breath and remember before we talk about anything else. And that's the season is not over. You are talking about a team that went on the road in the SEC and lost a game to another SEC opponent. When you think about last year, you think about how the college football playoffs shook out. Who were the two teams that played in the national championship? Ohio State and Notre Dame. And what did those two teams have in common? Well, Ohio State had a loss that they shouldn't have against Michigan at the end of the year. And then, Notre Dame had a loss to Northern Illinois early in the season that they probably shouldn't have had. Ohio State had two losses, but one of those came to Oregon, who was the number one overall team in the playoff last year. So that one didn't hurt them as much, right? So that's the thing. If you had two teams play in the national championship last year with multiple losses, the fact that you dropped one on Saturday in Oxford is not the end of the world. The season is not done. You still have so much of the season left ahead of you. And again, going back to how this schedule falls, it works out in your favor that after this bye week, you play South Carolina at home. You do go to Vanderbilt, which will not be an easy game by any means, but you should be favored in it. And then you play Texas A&M, who's probably the toughest opponent you have in the next three games at home as well. So there's still so much ahead of you in terms of your goals, in terms of your accomplishments. I know that it seems really bad right now, but here's the thing. You still have a lot to play for. Now, it's going to come down to fixing a lot of this stuff that is not going great, but the season is not completely done. So if you're on that doom and gloom, boat right now, just take a deep breath and just relax for a minute because it's not over. This is not going to be done until the 12-team playoff plays itself out. So if you can just at this point punch your ticket into it, anything can happen. But with all that being said, Saturday was an absolute disaster for LSU. And look, I think there's 100 different ways we can talk about this. The first avenue I'm going to go down, though, is the defense. Because honestly, if you walked out of Saturday thinking that LSU's defense is not elite and it's not good because of what happened on Saturday in Oxford, we're not talking about the same team. Look, did LSU's defense play probably its worst game so far of the season? Yeah, sure. But when you factor in the fact that they probably ended up playing closer to 90 plays, when you account for plays that they had to do over again because of penalties and all that good stuff, I mean, you can understand why they showed a few cracks in the foundation. Because when you're playing that much, you're going to get gassed eventually. And I talked about this a little bit in my Florida recap. But when you were playing Florida, you were really benefited by the fact that DJ Lagway kept throwing interceptions because your defense kept going out there over and over and over again. And by the end of that game, they were starting to look a little bit tired, a little bit winded. They were starting to give up some plays that they shouldn't have. But luckily, again, you just kept getting turnovers and it kind of erased some of those things. But Ole Miss, on the other hand, what they did was very smart. They kept the ball away from people like Mansour Delane. Yes, they had a couple turnovers. Caden Lee fumbled the football when AJ Halsey went in there with a beautiful, he punched that ball out and they were able to recover it, which was awesome. And of course, PJ Woodland had a huge interception, in the game. And so, yes, Ole Miss turned the ball over a few times, but they limited their mistakes as much as they could against this defense. And that was the smartest thing that Lane Kiffin really drew up and designed. And so, really, yes, I know they gave up 24 points. They gave up a good amount of yards, which does not seem great. But when you look at it from the overarching view and from the wide view, and you say, okay, but they were also out there a lot. They were down Gabe Relaford for the first time, trying to figure out who's going to be the fourth guy on that defensive line rotation, trying to figure out just how that's going to work and all those good things. You can kind of understand why they maybe didn't have their best performance on Saturday. Now, here's the other thing. You got to tip your hat to the Ole Miss offense sometimes. A lot of the catches that they had were very, very tough catches. I mean, I went back and watched, a couple of the highlights, and man, it seemed like every big catch that an Ole Miss receiver made, I mean, there was an LSU defender on their hip most of the time. There were a few busted coverages, which you don't like to see, but again, you just had to keep going out there over and over and over and over again. And at some point, they're going to get you on a couple of those plays. But for the most part, this LSU defense played outstandingly. And look, you did have a pick six that got overturned because of pass interference. You did basically hand them a drive because you kept committing just silly penalties over and over and over again. And that's not great when you shoot yourself in the foot. I mean, obviously, that was not a perfect performance by the LSU defense by any means. I don't think it was Blake Baker's best game as the defensive coordinator either. But overall, I don't think you could have asked much more of this defense given the circumstances. Now, obviously, this defense is good enough to lean upon in a lot of the matchups that you have this year, but you cannot keep asking them to do this. You can't ask them to be your saving grace over and over and over again. Just like you couldn't ask Jaden Daniels to deliver every single moment that he was out there on the field, you can't ask this defense to do the same thing. But unfortunately, it seems like they're very comfortable doing that right now. And there's going to be more games like this if you keep sending them out there to do that. Now, I have seen a lot of complaints from people on Twitter and stuff saying they didn't spy enough, they didn't do all these things, yada, yada, yada. They did spy. When you're looking at the highlights, they did spy. The unfortunate thing was, though, they didn't spy enough with Perkins. They spied a lot more with Whit Weeks and West Weeks. And the only part about that that's bad is you can do that against a guy like Jackson Dart or Cade Klubnik, a guy that's, maybe capable of running, but not, a super quick runner. But against somebody like Trinidad Chambliss that can take off and be really effective, you need Perkins in that situation to be your spy the majority of the time. That's just what you need to have happen. And I think that was one of the areas where Blake Baker did not flex the ultimate weapon that he has on his roster enough. Again, going back to one of the first episodes I did of this podcast where I said Harold Perkins is one of your biggest X factors, he's one of your most important players for the year. That's the guy that you've got to have out there going and making play after play after play. And in a game like this, it's just, hey, Perkins, see number 6, go out there and get him every single time. Go in the backfield, make him uncomfortable. If he tries to run, bring him down. That's the situation you needed to have unfold. And Blake Baker didn't press that button enough, in my opinion. And so it is unfortunate you didn't draw up the best game defensively, but at the same time, you cannot fault the defense for this one. They did everything they possibly could, and they held a Lane Kiffin-led offense to 24 very, very tough points. I mean, heck, their first couple of series were back-to-back 3-and-outs, and then an 18-play drive that ended in a field goal. I mean, that is not an easy task with a Lane Kiffin offense ever. And the fact that you were able to do that just proves once again that this defense should not be faulted for the loss on Saturday. And that's just, to make it as simple as possible. Yes, there are things to fix. Yes, there are things to improve upon. But I think overall, this defense is still one of the best units in college football. And I think they can easily hold their own in any matchup for sure. And I think, again, this could be something that just makes them better. Now that you have a loss under your belt, you've seen, hey, you're not just this invincible group. Now you can kind of move forward and fix some things and adjust for the rest of the season to make yourselves better. So I think this defense is going to be just fine. The offense, on the other hand, is where the alarm bells should be ringing. As relaxed as we should all be about, that the season's not over, all these things, the offense is the one cause for alarm, I think, that is very valid amongst all the fans. And the really annoying thing is right now is you've got all these media guys basically making one giant loop around one thing, and that's Garrett Nussmeier. And it feels like everybody doesn't know what to think right now with him. Because it's like, okay, Garrett Nussmeier, he's healthy. He's just, for some reason, he's not playing right. Well, Garrett Nussmeier's not healthy, and he looks off. He looks weird. Well, you can't ask Garrett Nussmeier to go out there, even if he is healthy, to throw against 8 people who are dropping back and all these. And it just feels like we're in one big carousel, and nobody can find one, one point to really settle on. And look, part of that is to blame for LSU. I mean, we don't really have exact clarity on what this injury was. We just know that he had a torso injury and that maybe it was holding him back a little bit. I don't know. And look, I can understand that against Southeast Louisiana the week before, he looked awesome. He looked a lot like the Garrett Nussmeier of old and all these things, but he also took some shots in that game that made me a little bit like, ooh, like he probably shouldn't be in there right now. I think for a lot of this, it's just, is Nussmeier really healthy or not? We don't know. Is this an injury where it can just flare up randomly? Sure, I could see that. But here's the one thing Garrett Nussmeier is 23 years old. The fact that he can't get zip on the ball is not because he's lost arm strength. There's no way a 23-year-old quarterback is going out there and just all of a sudden losing arm strength when literally he is at LSU right now to play football. I mean, that is what he is there for. I mean, he's working out, he's doing all the things that he's supposed to do. Well, at least we hope. It's got to be some kind of an injury for me. I mean, and maybe he's pressing a little bit because he's not trying to have the whole gunslinger mentality that's always been, associated with him. I could see that too a little bit. But for me, there's just no pop on the ball. There's no zip on the ball. Even his big play to Xavier Thomas was several yards behind. He had a walk-in touchdown to Chris Hilton that was severely underthrown. I mean, it's just one of these cycles of things where, yes, I want to, kind of be in agreement of he's pressing a little bit, sure, but he also just doesn't look right physically. He's not getting that same strength on the football that I have seen in the past from him. And he's not making throws that we've seen him make 100 times before. There is something wrong with Garrett Nussmeier, and you better hope and pray that it is something that can be healed up over the course of the next 2 weeks before you have to play South Carolina. Because if he is messed up and they can't find any other direction to go in with him or with any of the other quarterbacks on this roster, this is going to be a long year. And yes, your season will be done without going to the playoff. You'll still win some games here and there, but you will not go to the playoff if Garrett Nussmeier cannot get back on track because he is going to be one of the bigger components that gets this whole thing going. Now, the other problem, obviously, is this: you have no run game. You absolutely have no running game. This was a game going into it that LSU should have been able to run the ball at least some. I'm not talking about like a 200, 250 yard performance, but they should have gotten at least over 100 yards in this ball game. They just should have. And I get it. Caden Durham was out, and that takes a big, heavy hitter out of your lineup. But Ole Miss has the worst rush defense in the SEC, and they're one of the worst rush defenses in college football. And the fact that you had other SEC teams like Arkansas, who is not that great, you had Kentucky, who is not that great, be able to run all over this Ole Miss defense, and you could barely scratch up, what was it, like maybe 57 yards on the ground for the day? That is not good. And it doesn't take me saying that to make it, you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say right now. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out, I guess, is pretty much what I'm saying. Like, I'm not breaking any, big time news here. You should have been able to go out there and put up at least 100 rushing yards on this defense, because this rushing defense is not that great. And also, like I just mentioned, what was their game plan the entire time versus LSU? They were dropping back 8 and rushing 3 most of the time. And it's just like, how can you not even find some kind of small way to get the running game going when they're dropping 8 people back into coverage? I just don't understand how that happens. And here's the thing, we can talk about personnel, we can talk about running backs, we can talk about the talent, we can talk about everything else. The fact that you just can't simply run the football at any kind of level, at any kind of consistency, is going to hamper you severely. And again, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. You have to play complementary, offensive football to win games. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be closer than what this is. Because what this is right now is just an absolute train wreck. And look, I don't know how to fix it. Everybody I've basically listened to is in agreement of, we don't necessarily know how to fix it, but there's got to be something you can implement that can at least get it going somewhat and make it better. Now, there's a lot of people right now clamoring for Michael Van Buren to be the starter, to be the starting quarterback, to be the guy, if Nuts is healthy, not healthy, whatever. A lot of people are just absolutely clamoring and yelling that you should be putting in Michael Van Buren. And I don't necessarily agree with the notion of you should start Michael Van Buren, because I think Garrett Nussmeier is still probably your best option at quarterback, considering he is a fifth-year senior. He just threw for 4,000 yards. Like, we know what Nussmeier can do, especially when he's healthy and 100%, right? We know what he can do. So it's like, you got to continue to send him out there. But what I've been on and what I've said on this podcast before, which is something that I think they should at least attempt, is going back to the good old days of a 2-quarterback system, where Van Buren comes in, and yes, maybe it is super predictable because he is going to run an option play. He's going to run some kind of an RPO. I don't know. But here's the thing. I know Van Buren didn't play like this. He didn't have these fantastic numbers at Mississippi State. I know he didn't just have these kind of statistics that made your eyes pop and go, wow, holy smokes, this dude is coming in here and he's going to be the heir apparent, all these things. But Michael Van Buren, despite his statistics, I mean, he can play very, very well at times. He has shown some flashes over the course of last year at Mississippi State and even against Southeast Louisiana of being a guy that he could, make things interesting if you threw him into the ball game every now and again. Now, again, I'm not saying he has to be the starter. I would actually kind of vote against him being the full-time starter as of right now. As long as Nussmeier can actually get healthy and be 100%, then I want Nussmeier to be the starter. But all I've ever said is I think Michael Van Buren could come in and at least add some interesting wrinkles into the offense to make it somewhat viable and potentially open up the run game. And there's so many media people that are screaming, no, that's an idiotic decision. He was not that good at Mississippi State. There's a reason they were 2-10 last year and all this and yada yada. Y'all, here's the thing. And I have a friend that's a Mississippi State fan, and maybe I should have him on at some point because He does a Mississippi State podcast every single week. And I think he would sit here and fully admit, I don't want to speak for him, but last year that was a 2-10 football team. You can't tell me that that roster was really that great. They went in the portal this past season. They added a lot of really good people, and look at what they're doing now. You cannot tell me that Michael Van Buren having a kind of a weird statistical year last year where his numbers weren't super poppy and only winning like what, maybe one game as the starter or whatever was on him. As much as it was, he just had a really bad roster to work with. I would argue that Michael Van Buren, given the roster that he has right now, with Barryon Brown, with Nick Anderson out there to throw to potentially on an RPO, Aaron Anderson to throw to, with guys like Caden Durham, to potentially run an option play with. You cannot tell me that he can't at least be an interesting wrinkle just to do run offense plays with. Even if he's not ready to be a passer, and everybody's pointing to the Jelani Watkins underthrow, it's like, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, it was underthrown, but he's also throwing to like what? I mean, the seventh or eighth receiver on the roster right now. Like, I don't understand why we're nitpicking him throwing to like the deep backups, at whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm the one being silly. I just think he could add some kind of value as a mobile quarterback in some kind of a two quarterback system where he's coming in to do running plays. And again, yes, would it be somewhat predictable? Probably so. But I also think he's got a good enough arm where he's not just going out there and not going to be able to do anything. Again, if you mix it up where maybe he runs a couple option plays and then, pulls up with an RPO, that could be really effective for at least, a couple of plays in a series. And then you put Nussmeier back in there to kind of continue to pick apart and do all these things. It's just you are struggling right now to establish any sort of a running game. You got to think of something. You got to think of something. You've got a guy on the roster at the quarterback position that can run at a higher level than what Nussmeier can, at least. And I just think it's at least worth a try to mix him in for some plays. Again, not full time starter, but just being integrated into the offense. And then also, speaking of guys that you could utilize in different ways, Jawan Johnson was a former quarterback in high school as well. He set records in Louisiana as a quarterback prospect. And I know he's played 13 different positions at LSU, and he's now a running back more so out of necessity than anything else. But I mean, holy smokes, you got to think Jawan Johnson could run some kind of a wildcat where, maybe you pull him up after a while to do an RPO or something. Like, you got to think there is some form of a world where they can get some fresh design, some fresh plays into, this offensive philosophy where they can get this run game going somehow. And look, they do use a couple of quick plays, the Xavier Thomas wrinkle where he comes into the backfield, Barryn Brown when he comes, in motion to catch a little pitch from behind or something like that. They've got a couple of those little wrinkles to try to help things out, but I just think there's very many options to do to just try to at least add fun, interesting wrinkles to this thing to try to open it up. But that's the thing. They just can't get anything going right now. And until you can figure it out, I mean, this is going to be very, very difficult for you moving forward. Now, again, I think when it comes to this offense, it's literally every layer right now that is completely messed up because not only is your quarterback banged up and hurt and not capable of making the throws he needs to make, not only can you not run the ball, your running backs can't run. They don't have the vision or whatever. They can't seem to find the right gaps and all these things. Your offensive line is also playing terribly right now. Now, Carius Kern had to be a late second starter because Weston Davis got hurt in warmups. But holy smokes, that might have been a blessing in disguise because Carius Kern played pretty well for his first, official start in the SEC. And Carius Kern at right tackle did not play that badly. I think he got like an 80 for his passing grade in Pro Football Focus. He was not great in run blocking according to, PFF, but I mean, Carius Kern did pretty well in pass pro. Paul Mabenga eventually got hurt as well. So, I mean, that didn't help out the offensive line either. But all of your guys on the offensive line just cannot seem to get it together and run block effectively. They can't seem to even, be super great at pass pro most of the time. Now, I will say there were a lot of times as I was listening to the game, I kept hearing Jacob Hester on the broadcast say, listen, Nussmeier can't complain on that one. He had like 5 seconds to throw the ball. Like there were a lot of times where it seemed like throughout the course of the game, Nussmeier was getting some time to let something develop, but then that's where the whole they're dropping eight into coverage really kind of comes back to sting you because even when your offensive line was finally giving you some time, you weren't able to take advantage of it because of the intense coverage. So it's just very, very sad that you cannot get anything going on any level. And so, what does this boil down to really? Is this a Joe Sloan needs to be gone thing? Is this a Brad Davis needs to be gone thing? I've had a lot of time to think about it and to twirl it over in my mind. And here's kind of the whole thing. I think some of this is the player's fault. Like, I will not fault the receivers at this point because, I mean, what are they supposed to do when every throw is like behind them? Like, yeah, they've had a few drops here and there, but I mean, what's Chris Hilton supposed to do when he's got a walk-in touchdown and it's thrown behind him? What's he really supposed to do other than try to go draw a pass interference, which he did? You can't blame the receiving core for that. You just can't. Like, it's not their fault that the quarterback's not playing up to the standard he should. Healthy, unhealthy, whatever it may be, he's not, for some reason, he's not able to play at the level he should be. And you can't blame receivers for that. You just can't. Also, you cannot blame the receivers for the fact that their offensive line has not given them any kind of balance with the run game. And I don't really want to blame the running backs too much either, but there have been some times where it seems like their vision has not been great. All that being that said, though, I do think some of this is on the players for sure. I think, some of this is just they are not playing a very good brand of football right now. But I think this is on everybody. Joe Sloan has been terrible as a play caller. Joe Sloan has been awful at sequencing these drives. There are a couple of handful of plays every single game that I go, that was a pretty good play. But those are very few and far between. Joe Sloan, honestly, I think this was one of the biggest gambles Brian Kelly has taken, and it has fallen flat on its face. Joe Sloan, I'm, pretty positive they really only promoted to OC because they were afraid of losing him. He was a hot name on the market, and somebody was willing to take a chance on him, they thought, so they promoted him to OC after Denbrock left. And I think we're seeing why that was a mistake. You should not have promoted a guy to a position he's never done at the Power 4 level before. Just because you thought maybe he could reel you in Bryce Underwood. I was not a huge fan of the hire when it happened. Literally, I kind of called it as it was. I said, I think they're really only doing this because of Bryce Underwood. And then you saw what that really got you, which was nothing. Joe Sloan was not ready for this job. He just wasn't. And Brian Kelly, as soon as Denbrock walked out the door, should have been interviewing guys that actually had Power 4 play calling experience. Because Joe Sloan, he is not it. He's just not. And I don't care if Cortez Hankton is also a part of this. I don't care if Alex Atkins is a part of this in the play calling, whatever. Joe Sloan is the guy with the official title, and he's the one in the booth. He's gotta have to hold most of the weight on this. And look, I don't know if it's any better if Brian Kelly starts calling the plays or not. I don't know if it's better if you just demote, Joe Sloan back to just being a quarterback coach and doing all that. But here's the thing, at some point, you cannot keep relying on this guy to call plays for you. You just can't. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's struggling to do it. And look, there was also a rumor that started to come out throughout the game that they forced Denbrock out in support of Joe Sloan because of the Bryce Underwood stuff. And I'll say this, I think two things can be true at the same time. I think definitely that could have been a reality where they said, hey, we want to keep Joe. We're afraid he might walk for an OC job. He's got really good connections with Bryce Underwood. Can he just be the co-OC and all these things? And then you made Denbrock upset. And then he left. I could see that being very true. But also, I think probably one of the more overwhelming things that's more true than anything else is just that Denbrock is from the Midwest. Like, Denbrock spent a lot of time at Notre Dame previously. Like, I think it was just a move where he got to go home. And also, like, Marcus Freeman was just going to let him do whatever he wanted since Marcus Freeman is a, defensive minded guy. And as long as Denbrock just calls a good offense, he doesn't care. Like, I think there was multiple layers to that were enticing for Denbrock to go back to Notre Dame. I don't think it was just the Joe Sloan thing, but I could also see two things being true again at the same time. But listen, I don't care. Here's the thing. If you put all the money in the basket for a guy that's never called Power 4 offenses before because you're afraid of losing one quarterback recruit in the NIL era when you can go out and literally just go, hey, you, so and so, you want to come here and play at LSU? Come on. I think that's the dumbest decision they've made. Is promoting him just because of Bryce Underwood. Look, Bryce Underwood's got the potential to be a really great player, a really great quarterback, and he's definitely somebody that you would have loved to have had on this team. For sure. But I don't ever think one recruit is that good to where it's worth potentially costing your program by promoting a guy who's not ready for a job, just to get that one kid. I don't think there's any player out there that's worth that. So, all that being said, is it a Joe Sloan leaving thing? I don't know. I think another problem with this is Brad Davis. Honestly, you look at Brad Davis and what he's done. I think one thing really stands out. He is a great recruiter. There's no denying about that. He's been able to recruit a lot of 4 and 5-star guys for this offensive line group. And that's well, fine, and dandy. It helps you with your recruiting numbers, getting you top 10 recruiting classes. Awesome. But when it comes to the development on the field, it just doesn't seem like it's been there. It just doesn't seem like these guys on the field are getting results. And I don't know again, is that because of the offense? Is it because of the guys that they got going out there? I don't know. All I know is you had 4 offensive linemen last year that went to the NFL and you still couldn't run the ball. You had 4 guys go to the NFL last year on that offensive line. One was a top 5 pick, and you still couldn't run the ball. At some point, this Brad Davis has got to be evaluated as well. Yes, I know he's such a good recruiter, and that's going to be really hard to potentially let go of. But when you can't develop the recruits that you're bringing in, I mean that's just not good. It is not good for you. And I'll go back and I'll say this too. I mean, this might be a little bold to say for sure, but I mean, Jaden Daniels honestly covered up a lot of the problems that rushing offense had even when he was here. Because of what Jaden Daniels could do with his legs, covered up the fact that those running backs still were not necessarily running the ball great during that time. I mean, the reason why they had so much rushing success, in my opinion, during those years with Jaden was because of what Jaden did. And the fact that he was such a big rushing threat that defenses had to account for him. But you go back and probably look at those statistics from those 2 seasons of Jaden Daniels, and you're going to see that no running back was really like spectacular. Like there wasn't a running back that just was posting up these big time, numbers every single week. And so just again, that's one of those things of, is Brad Davis actually producing a viable line week in and week out that's performing and getting good push, or does it take having a generational quarterback that can run the ball like any running back in the country to make Brad Davis look like a good O-line coach? That's the thing. I don't know. But what I do know is this. It doesn't seem like the last 2 years have been a good reflection on Brad Davis, considering again you had one line that was super talented, couldn't run the ball, was pretty good in pass pro, but couldn't run the ball. And then now this year you have a line that, yes, by all means is being pieced together a little bit by guys that you've had in the program and by guys that you brought in through the transfer portal that were supposed to be really good. But the same problems exist, and it's even worse because it doesn't seem like they can even do one thing right. They can't even do pass pro right, let alone run blocking. So I think this, again, this is a multi layered thing where this just isn't on the players. This isn't just on Joe Sloan as the play calling. I think you got to start looking at every level of this offensive staff too. I mean, what is Brad Davis doing where they can't even run block properly? Get that push, get that tenacity going. I mean, what is going on there? I don't know. I really don't. But all I'm saying is this: during and dear goodness, I mean, obviously you cannot just wait for the off season. I mean, you got to start evaluating these things like right now during the bye week. Like, because again, you've got a lot to play for. But if your coaching staff can't get it done and they aren't it, then you've got to start doing something to get these players excited about getting going. I don't know what that's going to take, but listen, I mean, I wish I could sit here and have an offensive fix. I really do. But this is the problem with the current state of this roster and this team. This coaching staff offensively, in my mind, is not good enough right now. And these offensive players are not playing good enough right now. It is literally just a really bad pairing. And there's just, unfortunately, there's no Jaden Daniels, there's no Malik Neighbors, there's no Brian Thomas Jr. walking through that door to help you out. You've got the guys that you've got. Now, again, I think if Nussmeier can get fully healthy, that could add a lot of value back to this offense. And by gosh, it could make it a lot better. But, man, it just seems like right now you are in a world of hurt because you cannot figure out what you need to do. And look, again, maybe this is just something where we got to get through this season and then get to the point where we can go find a good play caller somewhere. Cut ties with Joe Sloan, cut ties with some of this staff, go find guys that are going to come in and do what they need to do. But for right now, we have who we have, and we got to roll with that. Honestly, go hire Sam Pittman as a freaking offensive line analyst or something. I mean, surely that can help, right? I don't know. There's got to be something at this point because there's just no excuse for how badly you look every single week out there. But all that being said, the rest of this season is very much so up in the air. I can see it going multiple directions. I can see it where you get all your stuff together during these next couple weeks. You go to play South Carolina in Tiger Stadium. It is going to be a night game now. You know, you go in there, you handle your business, you play really well against them, you go on the road, you beat Vanderbilt. That's awesome. You beat A&M at home, you go into your next bye week, kind of riding some momentum. Now you've got a little bit of some breathing room, and then take on, that team in Tuscaloosa, and you may lose that one. But at least, hey, you've got 2 losses. At 10-2, you can still punch it in. As long as you win out, you could be knocking on the door of the playoffs. I could see that being the case still. But I can also see a world where, yeah, maybe you beat South Carolina, you beat Vanderbilt, but then you drop one to, once again, Marcel Reed and the A&M Aggies, a game that you shouldn't lose, but you will potentially. Then you go to Tuscaloosa and you drop that one. And heck, maybe you even go on the road to Oklahoma to end the year and you drop that one. I could see a world where you're losing a couple more games this year. It feels like just it's just this big wide divide between the outcomes right now. because of the fact that your offense is just literally at the bottom of the barrel, just scraping along. And it's just such a shame how far you have fallen off from where you just were a couple of seasons ago, where you had the best offense in college football. And it's crazy. And I wish there was a solution. I wish Van Buren had a much better year last year at Mississippi State. So maybe you're sitting here going, you know what? Let's start Michael Van Buren because we trust him. We've seen what he's done in the past. Maybe that would have been the fix, you know. But I don't know. It just feels like at this point you got to have just the crash card out, trying to revive this thing as urgently as you can because you are struggling and it's not pretty. But all that being said, I mean, the loss on Saturday was a coaching malpractice. It was just terrible coaching. It's terrible offensive play. Only saved by the fact that your defense is still a really good unit. Just played a little too much on that day, playing nearly again, probably ended up being like 90 plays. And the fact that you still only lost by 5, it's not like we're sitting here and getting blown out either by Ole Miss. You only lost by 5 points on the road. That's not terrible. You still had a shot to go down there and win it. You just couldn't do it. I mean, it's not like I said, like you just flat out fell on your face and got blown out by 30. You still kept it close. But all that being said, you just dropped the ball in a big, big way. You really did. And it's very, very disappointing because now you have to have this negative feeling for the bye week, and I don't like that at all. I'd rather go into this bye week feeling confident and happy about coming out of it, you know. But we're just flat right now. Just everybody's flatlined right now, and it's a sad place to be. But here's the other thing, and I'll kind of end up this LSU portion with a couple quick things. One, this could be the best thing that happens to this team. You talk about a defense that's been playing like they're just this immovable force. And now they got pushed around a little bit. This could absolutely light a fire under them to just go out there and just play mean and nasty defense the rest of the year. And that might be incredible. Same thing for this offense. This offense may have just have been so bad in this one, and now they're going to have to hear everything from everyone for the next 2 weeks. Maybe this lights a fire under them and goes, you know what? Gosh dang it, let's go out there. Let's go run the ball. Let's show everybody we got a run game. Power eye, whatever you got to do. Go run the ball. Nussmeier gets healthy during these next 2 weeks. He just slings the rock around like crazy, like he's supposed to. And maybe this offense course corrects and you just end up having a baller team the rest of the year. This loss could have ended up being probably one of the best things for this team, maybe in the long run, if it can ignite that fire underneath them and launch them into the rest of the year. Hopefully that is the effect it takes and not the opposite, which is, okay, now you look like you've got a lot of cracks in the foundation and you completely crumble. I'm looking at the positive. I'm thinking that this has got the potential to light that fire underneath them and get them going for the rest of the year. That's what I'm going to be hoping for. But here's the other thing that I think for LSU fans, you should also take some encouragement from this one. And look, it's going to seem like some sour grapes, but it's also just the truth. That Ole Miss team is not good. That is not a good Ole Miss team. The fact that they're number 4 right now is honestly very laughable. To me, there's a lot of people that are just like, "Oh my gosh, Ole Miss is so good." They're not. They're not good. That defense is not good. That defense has just significantly less talent than they did last year. Yes, they ran into the most fortunate scenario for them where they played a limping offense and they were able to take advantage of that and win. And by all means, again, you got to tip your hat to them. They won the game on Saturday. But they are being extremely overhyped right now based off of one game. And I know for LSU, you maybe at this point could also say that after beating Clemson, but Ole Miss fans, Ole Miss hypers need to take a small step back right now because that defense is going to cost them some games. And Trinidad Chambliss is not always going to be able to do what he did on Saturday, play a super clean game and all these things. That is a football team that very easily could lose potentially like 3 of its next games. It really could. And so that's the thing. I think we're going to see this Ole Miss team drop several games, and we're going to end up looking back on this going, gosh, dog it, we should not have lost that game. And we shouldn't have. LSU should not have lost that game on Saturday. They were the much better team. But Ole Miss ended up coming up with the upset. But Ole Miss is now being extremely overhyped, and I'll eat crow on this if I'm wrong. But they will not make it to the finish line into the college football playoff at the end of this year. This roster is not nearly as good as his team last year. And I hate that clown Lane Kiffin got the win, and he gets to be all arrogant and hoity-toity about beating LSU and all these things. He gets to be so arrogant and all that for the next probably week or so. But guess what? It's all going to come crashing down to earth for them here really soon, and I can't wait to see it. I'm going to be watching every Ole Miss game with such joy, knowing that they are not going to have this level of success moving forward. But all that being said, LSU did lose. It was a terrible loss, but you've got a lot of things, yes, to fix, but you've also got a lot of things left to prove. But there was also some things in week 5 as I looked back that I kind of noticed and wanted to talk about, and I'll share my reactions with you on that in just a second. So as we look back over week 5, kind of one of the biggest thoughts and reactions that I had after now 5 weeks into the college football season, I'll just go ahead and throw it out there, is this. I don't think I can name one team this year that has just been a truly dominant team. Usually by this point, we have enough of a sample size where we can say, okay, that team is truly dominant. Okay, that team looks like one of the best teams in college football. And it just feels like this year that does not exist. It feels like every team has some kind of a flaw or some kind of just barrier that is holding it back from its highest potential. I mean, you look at Florida State, Virginia. Florida State lost that one on Friday night. And man, for one thing, let's just say this. I mean, congratulations to Virginia. You went out and won that game. And look, that's one of those games of why you just end up loving college football so much because of the absolute chaos that can happen each and every single week. That's why we love college football as much as we do, right? For those kind of moments. And look, Castellanos put a beautiful throw on a rope to somebody, and it ended up getting bobbled and dropped out of bounds. Well, not dropped, but he should never have, he bobbled the ball too much and it ended up being incomplete. But there was nothing Florida State, I don't think, could have done necessarily better to pull out that one. I mean, they gave it everything that they had and they still ended up losing the game. Yeah, maybe defensively you don't give up 46 points to Virginia, but still, those kind of games are just going to happen throughout a college football season. I mean, upsets happen all the time, right? But then you have a game like Ohio State Washington, which like at some point in the third quarter was 14-6. And it's just like Ohio State should not only be up 14-6 on this Washington team that is not like that good. Julian Sayin had 208 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, but Jeremiah Smith has only 8 receptions for 81 yards, which I get it. We're used to kind of like some video game numbers sometimes. That's actually a really good day with a touchdown as well. I take back that earlier statement that that's not impressive by any means, but still, it's just like there's no world where Ohio State should be only leading 14-6 in the middle of the third quarter over Washington. There just shouldn't be. I mean, they should be absolutely beating the brakes off of them. And then you have Oregon, who, in my opinion, is a much better team than Penn State, and it takes them 2 overtimes to beat Penn State. And I'm not saying Penn State is a bad team by any means. They're a fine team, but Drew Aller is not nearly at the same level in my mind as Dante Moore is. And this Penn State defense this year is not nearly at the same level as they were last year with Abdul Carter. Like, Oregon, by all means, should have been able to kind of flex a little bit more and definitely not need 2 overtimes to beat Penn State. They just shouldn't have. But again, I'm struggling to find a truly dominant team. Texas A&M beat Auburn by 6 at home. And yes, sometimes you just have to find ways to win games, aka what LSU did against Florida, right? Where you had 5 interceptions and things like that. Like that does happen, but Auburn's not that good. And I mean, by all means, A&M should have beaten the brakes off of them. And it just didn't happen. There's not a single team that I've really truly watched this year that I just feel like is a dominant college football team. It really feels like this is one of those years where we're going to get to the college football playoff. And it's really going to just be open season where it's like, okay, this is going to be truly the best reason why we added a 12 team playoff is for seasons like this where it just doesn't feel like there's one truly runaway dominant team. And it's just kind of a weird feeling to be in. I'm not complaining by any means. It's just a really weird state to be in at this point where we're 5 weeks in and there's still not a team that's separated itself from the pack. And a lot of people here, I live in Tuscaloosa. So, yes, just be thinking of me at all times. Being an LSU fan here in Tuscaloosa, it is not a lot of fun most of the time. But of course, they're all hoity toity because they beat Georgia at Georgia on Saturday. It's like, congratulations. That was a very good win for you. Very good win. Ty Simpson looked pretty good in that one. But here's the thing you didn't score at all in the second half. You didn't score a single point if you're Alabama in the second half. A big fat goose egg. And if I presented to somebody randomly, hey, Georgia Alabama played on Saturday, it was a 3-point win for one of them, and Alabama didn't score at all in the second half, what would you have said? Who would you have said would have won that game? I guarantee you at least 8 out of 10 people would have said Georgia won. If you told me it was a 3-point win, Alabama didn't score at all in the second half, most people would have told you Georgia won if you just presented it to them like that. And that's the thing is even Alabama this year with a team that has improved since week 1 for sure. They are a much better team now than they were when they got beaten down by Florida State in week 1. And I can admit that. But they're not dominant. They're not a truly just immovable dominant force out there on the football field. They are gettable. They are very gettable. And look, I mean, there are flaws on that team just as there are every other team. Georgia's got major flaws. Their secondary is, I don't know what they're doing right now. It just doesn't seem like their defense is at all at the same level as they've been over the last couple of years. Gunnar Stockton's obviously, he's a good quarterback, but he's a young quarterback. He is a developing quarterback. Like, every team has got very major flaws, it feels like this year. And honestly, I'm kind of excited about it. Yes, it's a weird place to be in, but it also just truly feels like it's one of those years where this is going to be so much fun because you're never going to be able to really predict what's going to happen from week to week. And I'm very, very excited about how this can all shake out over the course of the year. But all that being said, that was kind of my biggest takeaway from week 5 is it just doesn't feel like there's a team this year that is just like the best of the best. And so to be quite transparent with you, I'm excited to see how this one all plays out moving forward because I really do think this year has the potential to be one of the most fun seasons of college football that we've seen in a long time. But that's where I'm going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you guys for following along. If you would, make sure to just like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Also, if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe to us there so we can continue to hang out, have a lot of fun. Hope you guys have a great week. This week, we'll be back later in the week to talk about the predictions that I have for the games on this upcoming week of college football. Of course, it's going to be very weird not having an LSU game to cover, but we'll talk about some other big news and things that will come along the way, I'm sure. But until then, I hope you guys have a great week. And as always, let's go Tigers.